Hello everyone, we have another question on command of evidence textual type. And how do I know this? By reading the question stem. There are words like if true, strongly support, words like undermine support. They should always tell you that this is a command of evidence textual type of a question. Right? Now what are we going to support here? The team's conclusion. Which finding would most strongly support the team's conclusion? Where do we find the team's conclusion? It's obviously going to be in the text. So let's read the text in order to identify what the team's conclusion is, and then we'll go ahead and give it further support. Let's read the text. Archaeologist P, anthropologist X, and their colleagues investigated the domestication of farm animals in China during the Bronze Age. So these people, they are investigating the domestication of farm animals, right? That's the topic of their investigation in China in a particular period, right? By analyzing the chemical composition of the bones of sheep, goats, and cattle from this era. So what are they doing? They're analyzing the chemical composition of the bones of sheep, goats, and the cattle. What did they identify because of this analysis? The team determined that wild plants made up the bulk of sheep's and goats' diets. So basically they were able to identify that the sheep's and goats were having a lot of wild plants. This is what their diet consisted of majorly, the wild plants. While the cattle's diet consisted largely of millet. Now, what were the cattle having? They were majorly on millet. Now, what's millet? A crop cultivated by humans. So what's the difference between both of their diets? So the sheep and goats were basically more dependent on wild plants, whereas the cattle were more dependent on millet, which was grown by humans. Because of all of this analysis, they came to a certain conclusion. What are they concluding? The team concluded that cattle were likely raised closer to human settlements. The cattle were likely, they were closer to the human settlements, whereas sheep and goats were allowed to roam farther away. So cattle closer to human settlements, sheep and goats not so close, right? This is what they concluded. And we have to add more support to this, right? So we have to say the same thing. We have to add more support to this, that the cattle were closer, the sheep and goats weren't, right? Now let's go ahead and read our options. A. Analysis of the animal bones showed that the cattle's diet also so it's giving me an additional thing that their diet consisted of, that was wheat, which humans widely cultivated in China during the Bronze Age. So they also consumed wheat. Cattle were also consuming wheat, which is again another crop cultivated by humans, right? So this is adding more support to the fact that the cattle were likely closer to the human settlement. Right, so I already like this option. Most probably this is going to be my answer, which is adding more support to the conclusion, but I'm gonna go ahead and eliminate the rest of the options here. Now B, further investigation of sheep and goat bones revealed that their diets consisted of small portions of millet as well. Now there are two problems with this option. The first problem is that if sheep and goat bones showed that they were consuming millet, then it doesn't really support the conclusion. It in fact weakens the conclusion by stating that they were having something, they were eating something that was cultivated by humans. So probably even they were closer to humans settlement, right? That's the first problem. Second problem is this word small. Now understand one thing, that their diets consisted of small portions of millet. The consumption of small portion of millet is actually not going to strengthen or weaken the conclusion in any way, because it was a small proportion. It has to be a significant portion or a significant amount to really put an impact on the conclusion here. So a small portion is not even going to weaken the conclusion properly. Understand this. So be very careful with these words like few and small, right? So B is definitely out because A, it's weakening the conclusion. B, I don't like the word small. It's kind of not even weakening properly, right? So C, cattle's diets generally require larger amounts of food and a greater variety of nutrients than do sheep's and goat's diets. Okay, now this is a simple fact-based option. It's just telling me what their diets required, right? It does not tell me anything about the conclusion drawn, that is, if the cattle were closer to the human settlements or not. So I need to prove if the cattle were closer to the human settlements, not a fact that what their diet consisted of or what did they really need in larger amounts. So C is definitely out. It's a fact, it's not putting any support to the relation between the human settlement and the cattle. Let's go to D now. The diets of sheep, goats, and cattle were found to vary based on what the farmers in each Bronze Age settlement could grow. So it's again another fact-based option, which is simply telling me what did they eat and what did it depend on. Option, it's not really putting any emphasis on the fact if cattle were closer to the human settlement or not. So D is definitely out for that reason. And a very clear-cut answer, that's choice A.